The clinking of glasses and hushed conversations filled the air of the upscale French restaurant. Darnell, a black waiter in his late 20s, moved gracefully between tables, serving the city's elite with practiced ease. His eyes often drifted to Margaret, a regular patron seated at a corner table. Despite her designer dress and flawless makeup, she seemed oddly detached from the glamorous crowd around her. As Darnell refilled water glasses at a nearby table, he overheard snippets of Margaret's conversation. Her voice, usually confident, carried a hint of melancholy as she spoke about her childhood home. Intrigued, Darnell found himself drawn to her story. During his break, Darnell took a chance and approached Margaret's table. "Excuse me, Ms. Margaret, I couldn't help but overhear about your family home. It sounds fascinating." Margaret looked up, surprised by the interruption but not displeased. "Oh, it's quite something. A grand old mansion full of history and secrets. Sometimes I feel like those walls know more about my family than I do." Their conversation flowed easily, and Margaret's eyes lit up as she shared memories of exploring hidden rooms and discovering old trinkets. Darnell listened intently, offering genuine interest that seemed to break through Margaret's usual reserved demeanor. As the restaurant emptied and Darnell's shift ended, Margaret made an unexpected suggestion. "Would you like to grab a coffee? I'd love to hear more about your dreams and aspirations." Darnell hesitated, aware of the social divide between them, but Margaret's warm smile convinced him. They found a quiet cafe nearby and spent hours talking about their hopes, fears, and the challenges they faced in their respective worlds. Despite their different backgrounds, they discovered a shared sense of longing for something more. As they parted ways, both felt a connection had been forged, one that promised to bridge the gap between their separate lives and potentially change both their destinies. A week after their cafe meeting, Margaret approached Darnell at the restaurant with a glint of excitement in her eyes. As he cleared a nearby table, she pulled out an ornate key ring from her purse. The metal clinked softly as she held it up. "Each of these keys represents a part of my past," Margaret explained, her voice low. "And maybe our future, if you're interested in exploring with me." Darnell's eyebrows raised, both intrigued and slightly wary. "What do you mean?" "I want to revisit my family's mansion," Margaret said. "There's so much history there, and I think you might appreciate it. Would you come with me?" Darnell hesitated, aware of the potential complications. "Are you sure that's appropriate?" Margaret nodded firmly. "I trust you, Darnell, and I think we both have something to gain from this experience." The next day, they stood before the imposing gates of the old mansion. Darnell felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as Margaret unlocked the entrance. The grand house loomed before them, its weathered facade hinting at decades of stories within. As they stepped inside, the musty air enveloped them. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light piercing through partially covered windows. Margaret led Darnell to a set of large wooden doors. "This was the ballroom," she said, selecting a key from the ring. With a turn and a push, the doors creaked open. They entered a vast space, its grandeur muted by years of disuse. Faded wallpaper peeled at the corners, and sheet-covered furniture stood like silent sentinels. Margaret's voice was soft as she spoke. "We used to host such grand parties here, but after my parents died, it all stopped. The house became too big, too empty." Darnell watched her, seeing the weight of memories in her eyes. He realized that despite their differences, they shared a common thread of loneliness. In that moment, standing in the echoes of past opulence, their unlikely friendship deepened, setting the stage for the revelations to come. As they explored the mansion's dusty rooms, Darnell's eye caught a weathered wooden box tucked away in a corner. Curiosity piqued, he called Margaret over. "What's this?" Margaret frowned, not recognizing the item. "I'm not sure. Let's take a look." They carefully opened the box, revealing a stack of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon. As Margaret began to read, her eyes widened in shock. These are love letters," she whispered, "between my grandmother and a black civil rights activist." "I had no idea." Darnell leaned in, scanning the passionate words on the fragile paper. The letters spoke of secret meetings, shared dreams of equality, and a love that defied the strict social norms of their time. "This is incredible," Darnell said, his voice filled with awe. Your grandmother was involved in the civil rights movement? Margaret nodded slowly, still processing the revelation. It seems so. And to think, all this time, this part of my family history was hidden away. As they continued reading, the parallels between the past and their own budding friendship became impossible to ignore. Margaret looked at Darnell, a new understanding in her eyes. I've been so blind, she admitted. I never truly understood the struggles people like you face every day. Darnell took a deep breath, deciding to open up. It's not always easy. Just last week, I was passed over for a promotion at the restaurant. The manager said I wasn't the right fit for a more visible role. Margaret's face hardened with determination. That's not right. We need to do something about this. Their conversation shifted, moving from personal experiences to broader issues of systemic racism and inequality. As the afternoon wore on, they found themselves making plans to get involved with local advocacy groups, to use Margaret's social connections to raise awareness, and to continue exploring the mansion's secrets for more insights into the past. As they left the mansion that day, both felt a sense of purpose they hadn't before. The discovered letters had not only revealed a hidden chapter of Margaret's family history, but had also ignited a shared commitment to fighting for equality in their own time. In the weeks that followed, Darnell found himself at the center of a growing movement. His natural charisma, combined with the compelling story of Margaret's grandmother, drew people in. At community meetings, his voice rang out strong and clear, articulating the everyday injustices faced by people of color in their city. Local news outlets began to take notice. A young reporter cornered Darnell after one particularly passionate speech. Mr. Johnson, how does it feel to be the new face of the equality movement in New Orleans? Darnell paused, caught off guard by the question. I'm just one voice among many, he replied carefully. We're all fighting for a fair chance, for the opportunity to be judged by our character, not our color. Meanwhile, Margaret threw herself into organizing a fundraiser at her family mansion. She moved through her social circles with purpose, convincing old friends and acquaintances to attend and contribute. The night of the event arrived. The once dusty ballroom now gleamed, filled with a mix of wealthy socialites and community activists. Darnell stood near the entrance, feeling out of place in his rented tuxedo. Margaret appeared at his side, squeezing his arm reassuringly. You belong here as much as anyone, she whispered. As the evening progressed, the tension in the room became palpable. Conversations grew heated as different worldviews clashed. Darnell overheard snippets of debate, some supportive, others skeptical of the movement's goals. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Well, if it isn't Darnell, thinking he's too good to be a waiter now. Darnell turned to face Mr. Beaumont, his former employer at an upscale restaurant. The older man's face was flushed with alcohol and disdain. You should stick to what you're good at, boy, Beaumont continued, his voice rising. Leave the big ideas to those who know how the world really works. The room fell silent, all eyes on Darnell. In that moment, he realized that the real fight was just beginning. The movement had gained momentum, but the road ahead would be far from easy. Darnell stood tall, his eyes locked on Beaumont's. The silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Beaumont, he began, his voice steady and clear, I know exactly how the world works. That's why I'm here, fighting to change it. Beaumont scoffed, but Darnell pressed on. I've served your drinks, cooked your meals, and listened to your conversations for years. I've seen the opportunities you take for granted, the doors that open effortlessly for you, while remaining firmly shut for people like me. Margaret stepped forward, placing a hand on Darnell's shoulder in silent support. Her action didn't go unnoticed by the crowd. This isn't about being too good for any job, Darnell continued. It's about having the chance to be whatever we want to be, without our skin color being a barrier. It's about respect and equality, Mr. Beaumont, something you clearly need to learn about. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Several of Margaret's friends shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in agreement. Margaret's voice rang out next. I stand with Darnell, she declared, her gaze sweeping the room. And I'm using my influence to support this cause. It's time we all took a hard look at our privilege and how we can use it to create positive change. Her words caused an immediate stir. Some guests applauded, while others frowned in disapproval. A clear divide formed in the room, mirroring the larger societal split they were challenging. As the commotion settled, Darnell and Margaret exchanged a look of determination. They made their way to a quieter corner of the mansion, where Margaret produced another key from her ring. "There's more to uncover," she said, leading him to a hidden door. As it swung open, they found themselves in a small, dusty room filled with boxes and old furniture. Margaret gasped as she opened one of the boxes. Inside were letters, photographs, and documents, all related to her grandparents' involvement in the civil rights movement. "This is incredible," Darnell breathed, carefully examining a faded photograph of Margaret's grandmother standing proudly next to a well-known civil rights leader. As they delved deeper into the room's secrets, they realized that their current struggle was part of a much larger, ongoing fight for equality. The weight of history pressed upon them, both a burden and an inspiration for the challenges that lay ahead. In the dimly lit secret room, surrounded by the remnants of a hidden past, Darnell and Margaret sat among the scattered papers and photographs. The weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air. Darnell picked up a pamphlet from a 1960s protest, his fingers tracing the bold letters demanding equality. He looked up at Margaret, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and uncertainty. "Margaret, I need to ask you something." She nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Are you sure about this? About us?" Darnell's voice was low, tinged with worry. "This movement, it's becoming bigger than I ever imagined. The pushback we're facing, I'm afraid it might cost you everything. Your friends, your social standing, maybe even your safety." Margaret reached out, taking Darnell's hand in hers. "Darnell, what we're doing is right. It's necessary. Yes, I'm sure. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. But your world, my world needs to change," Margaret interrupted firmly. "And if I lose some fair-weather friends along the way, so be it. Real friendship, real allies, they stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." Darnell squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of gratitude and resolve. "Then we're in this together, all the way." They spent the next few hours poring over the documents, formulating a plan. They decided to organize a protest in front of the restaurant where Darnell used to work, targeting the discriminatory practices that had held him and others back for so long. As dawn broke, they emerged from the secret room, their eyes tired but spirits high. The mansion was quiet, the last of the fundraiser guests long gone. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day," Margaret said, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. Darnell nodded, his jaw set with determination. "It's time to make some noise, to make them listen." As they parted ways to prepare for the coming day, both felt the weight of the challenge ahead. The protest would be a turning point, not just for their movement, but for their friendship. Little did they know just how much their bond would be tested in the hours to come. The sun beat down on the crowded sidewalk in front of Beaumont's restaurant. Darnell stood at the center of a growing group of protesters, their voices rising in unison, demanding justice and equality. Signs bobbed above the crowd, bearing slogans like "End workplace discrimination" and "Equal opportunities for all." Margaret moved through the crowd, handing out water bottles and offering words of encouragement. The diversity of the protesters surprised her. People from all walks of life had shown up to support the cause. Across the street, a group of counter-protesters began to form. Their angry shouts cut through the air, tension mounting with each passing minute. Suddenly, a group of men broke away from the opposition, charging towards Darnell. Their faces were contorted with rage as they pushed through the crowd. "You're ruining everything," one man yelled, his fist raised threateningly. Time seemed to slow as Darnell saw the man's arm pull back. He braced himself for the impact, but it never came. Instead, he felt someone push in front of him. Margaret stood there, her arms spread wide, creating a human shield between Darnell and his attacker. "Stop!" Margaret's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "This man is my friend, and his fight is my fight. If you want to hurt him, you'll have to go through me first." The attacker hesitated, clearly not expecting this turn of events. The crowd around them fell silent, all eyes on Margaret and Darnell. Seizing the moment, Darnell stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Margaret. "We're not here to fight," he addressed the crowd, his voice steady and strong. "We're here because we believe in a better future. A future where the color of your skin doesn't determine your worth or your opportunities." Margaret joined in, her voice blending with Darnell's. "Look around you. See the diversity in this crowd? This is what our city should look like, people of all backgrounds standing together, supporting each other." Their words seemed to ripple through the crowd, diffusing the tension. Even some of the counter-protesters looked uncertain now, the anger in their eyes giving way to confusion and, in some cases, understanding. As police sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the imminent dispersal of the crowd, Darnell and Margaret stood firm, their impromptu speech turning into a rallying cry for unity and change. In that moment, amid the chaos and danger, their bond was cemented, forged in the fire of shared purpose and mutual protection. The aftermath of the protest hung heavy in the air as Darnell and Margaret sat in silence at a small cafe, far from the scene of the earlier confrontation. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving them both drained and introspective. Darnell stared into his untouched coffee, his brow furrowed. "I never meant for you to be in danger," he said, breaking the silence. "When I saw that man coming at me, and then you stepped in front of me, I've never been so scared and angry at the same time." Margaret reached across the table, her hand stopping short of touching his. "I made my choice, Darnell. I couldn't stand by and watch you get hurt." "But that's just it," Darnell replied, his voice tight with emotion. "This isn't your fight. You shouldn't have to put yourself at risk like that." Margaret's eyes flashed with determination. "It is my fight. It's everyone's fight. What happened today, it only proves how important this movement is." Darnell shook his head, pulling back slightly. "You don't understand. Your life, your world, it's so different from mine. You can walk away from this anytime you want. I can't." A hurt look crossed Margaret's face. "Is that what you think? That I'm just playing at this? That I'd abandon you and the cause when things get tough?" "I don't know," Darnell admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just know that I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." The tension between them was palpable. Margaret stood up abruptly. "I need some time to think, and maybe you do too." As she walked away, Darnell called out, "Margaret, wait." But she was already gone, leaving him alone with his thoughts and fears. Over the next few days, they both grappled with their emotions and solitude. Darnell threw himself into organizing, trying to ignore the ache of Margaret's absence. Margaret, meanwhile, wandered the empty halls of her family mansion, the weight of her family's complicated history pressing down on her. Their friendship, so recently strengthened by shared purpose, now hung by a thread, strained by the very real dangers and complexities of the world they were trying to change. A week passed, feeling like an eternity to both Darnell and Margaret. Darnell threw himself into the movement with renewed vigor, speaking at community centers and organizing meetings. But despite the growing support, he felt a constant void, acutely aware of Margaret's absence. One evening, after a particularly draining meeting, Darnell found himself walking past the restaurant where he used to work. He paused, staring at his reflection in the window. The man looking back at him seemed different, more confident, but also more burdened. He wondered if this was the cost of fighting for change. Meanwhile, Margaret spent her days in quiet reflection, poring over the letters and documents they discovered in the mansion. She traced her fingers over her grandmother's handwriting, feeling a connection to a woman she'd never truly known. The struggles and sacrifices detailed in those pages put her own actions into perspective. On a whim, she decided to visit the community center where Darnell had been speaking. She slipped in quietly, standing at the back of the room, watching him address the crowd, his passion evident in every word. She felt a mix of pride and longing. As Darnell wrapped up his speech, an older man approached him. "Son, I've got something you might be interested in," he said, handing Darnell a weathered envelope. "Found it while cleaning out my father's things. Thought it might be important to your cause." Curious, Darnell opened the envelope. Inside was a faded photograph and a brief letter. His eyes widened as he read, recognizing a name, his great-grandfather's. The letter spoke of a secret organization of both black and white individuals who had worked together for equality decades ago. Overwhelmed, Darnell looked up, his eyes scanning the dispersing crowd. That's when he saw her, Margaret, standing quietly at the back of the room. Their eyes met, a moment of silent communication passing between them. As people filed out, Margaret approached slowly. "Darnell," she began, her voice soft. "I think we need to talk." Darnell nodded, holding up the letter. "You won't believe what I just found out," he said, a hint of excitement breaking through the tension between them. They stood there, on the cusp of reconciliation, both realizing that their shared journey was far from over. The secrets of the past were still unfolding, weaving their lives together in ways they had yet to fully understand. Darnell and Margaret sat on a park bench, the letter spread out between them. As Darnell explained his discovery, Margaret's eyes widened with recognition. "Darnell, this is incredible," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Look at the names here. Some of these people, they're connected to my family too. It's like our histories have been intertwined for generations." Darnell nodded, a smile breaking through his serious expression. "It's like the past is reaching out to us, showing us that what we're doing isn't new. We're carrying on a legacy." Margaret reached into her purse, pulling out the ornate key ring. "Speaking of legacy," she said, her voice softening, "I realized something while we were apart. This key," she held up a small, intricate one. "It's not just to a room in the mansion. It's the key to my heart, Darnell, and I'm giving it to you." Darnell's breath caught in his throat. He gently took the key, feeling its weight in his hand. "Margaret, I know we come from different worlds," Margaret continued, "but that doesn't matter. What matters is that we're in this together. Whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face them side by side." Darnell nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Together, he agreed, taking her hand in his. As they sat there, reunited and recommitted to their cause, a figure approached from the shadows of a nearby tree. Both Darnell and Margaret tensed, memories of the protest still fresh in their minds. The stranger stopped a few feet away, his face hidden by the brim of a hat. "Ms. Beaumont," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I'm afraid your family's true legacy is in grave danger." Margaret stood, alarmed. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The man glanced around nervously. "I can't say more here, but if you want to protect what your grandmother and her allies fought for, you need to come with me. Now." Darnell stepped forward protectively. "We're not going anywhere with you until you explain yourself." The stranger sighed, reaching into his coat. "I was hoping to avoid this, but..." He pulled out an old photograph, one that matched the style of those they'd found in the mansion. As Margaret gasped in recognition, the man spoke again. "Time is running out. Are you ready to uncover the truth, no matter the cost?" Darnell and Margaret exchanged a look, years of trust and shared purpose passing between them in an instant. Whatever this new mystery was, they would face it together, just as their ancestors had done before them. The keys to their destiny were in their hands, and they were ready to unlock whatever doors lay ahead.